Like for real, Ace dies, I sleep. Bon Clay stays behind, that's when I wake. Hello my fellow weebs and welcome back to the One Piece saga. The series covering my never-ending journey of watching through One Piece for the very first time, giving my thoughts on it, and ranking each arc in a tier list to determine which is unquestionably, definitively, and definitely not just in my opinion, the best one. But today we have an arc that both made me incredibly excited about all the new possibilities that this sort of soft reset of the story brings, all the while filling me with dread as to what's about to go down. Though let's not get ahead of ourselves and take a quick look at how the tier list is looking right now. The recently covered Amazon Lily didn't quite live up to Sabaody and took the bottom C tier. Though with this most definitely being the last straw in the build-up of the much anticipated all-out war, might this one shoot back up to the S tier? Well, there's only one way to find out, so let us jump straight into Impel Down. We open the arc with Garp and Ace in the depths of Impel Down, and straight away we get a whole bunch of interesting things. First and foremost, we hear that Ace took his name from his mother and that he absolutely despises his father, naming Whitebeard as his one and true father. In terms of the wider story, this definitely continues building up Whitebeard as this larger-than-life type of character, so I really enjoyed that aspect of it, and it went a long ways towards building that intensity of Whitebeard's inevitable attack. Though Garp responds by sort of defending Dragon, which made me raise an eyebrow to say the least. In a broader sense, I'm curious about why Luffy never even knew his father existed while Ace seems to hate literally everything about him, even going as far as to disowning his family name. Perhaps it's a case of an older brother protecting his younger siblings or something along those lines, though who knows. What I think is more interesting here is Garp's response. Is this just a case of him being unable to hate his son no matter what he's done, or is there something more to it? Obviously we know that Garp still loves Luffy. He could have easily caught him in Post Tenny's lobby, but he didn't do that. So it would make sense as to why he'd still say that Dragon had reasons for doing what he did. And in a broader sense, we know at the end of the day, Garp is also of the D name. So it may just be a case of him not being able to fully blame someone who pursues what they believe to be right. Though yeah, I am very curious to find out what's the deal with Dragon and why Ace hates him while Luffy didn't even know he existed. There definitely seems to be something there. We then cut over to Luffy, who Hancock has successfully snuck into the prison. So from now on, she heads off to see Ace while Luffy continues to find his own way there. And straight away, we get to see someone who I certainly did not expect. That being Buggy. At this point, I still hadn't quite pieced together that this whole freeing past enemies and teaming up would be the premise of the arc, but I was definitely curious as to what kind of shenanigans they get into. Especially because, as you know, I've always been a little mixed on Buggy. Oh, and remember what I said about Luffy's bracelet in Sabaody? Well, Buggy wants it because it apparently leads to treasure? Honestly, even after finishing the arc, I'm still not entirely sure whether it actually had meaning or not. So I'm not entirely sure what that's about. I do still think that it was suspicious that it appeared at all, so is there something to it? Who knows? But yes, for now, Buggy is kind of forced to tag along, so they continue going deeper into the prison. Hello, Editing Kuroto here. One thing I forgot to mention is that I really loved how Buggy's like, wait a second, you're actually strong now. Because he was one of the very first villains we faced in the series, I think this just provided a very nice contrast as to just how far Luffy has actually come. Because we see him all the time, we never really notice that gradual power increase. Whereas Buggy last saw him in, what, Logtown? Though yeah, that was just a very nice detail. And soon after, we run into yet another past foe, that being Mr. 3. I'll be honest, at this point, I audibly groaned, because if you remember my thoughts about him on Little Garden, then it probably isn't that big of a surprise when I say seeing him and Buggy back to back was not what I wished for. Though with that said, I was pleasantly proven wrong, because I enjoyed seeing him a ton more in this one. A lot of that probably comes down to him being a lot more down to earth, but still, in my book, he is redeemed. But I will admit that later on when they diverged from Luffy's gang, I did get a little tired of seeing them. It's not that their side story was unenjoyable per se, it just felt like it was a tad overdone. So yes, all in all, Mr. 3 is unquestionably much more likable, but I think their tale was a little bit too dragged out. But with that said, the trio now continue their way deeper into Impel Down, which is when we cut to Jinbei and Ace. And the conversation they have is super interesting. If you recall what I said in Sabaody about why no one had claimed Fishman Island as their own, since it was the only way to get into the New World for pirates, we find out that someone has. And that someone is none other than Whitebeard himself. So yes, this 100% answers why the Navy hasn't messed with it, since it is Whitebeard. And 2, why no pirate has messed with it, because it is Whitebeard. Though, in a broader sense, and this might be the time to get your tinfoil ready, I can't help but feel like all of this is building up Whitebeard as this unstoppable force that's going to clash with an immovable object. That, of course, being the Navy. And when that happens, no one wins. This is me purely thinking from a writing perspective, but it would make sense in the narrative that when we enter the New World, the Old World, or in this case Whitebeard, would also be removed to signify a sort of a new generation. And with us just finding out that Fishman Island was basically protected by Whitebeard, doesn't it seem super convenient that that's our primary destination following the war? If Whitebeard's no longer in control, it wouldn't be smooth sailing anymore, would it? So yes, don your tinfoils, because this is me saying that Whitebeard will go out in a way to parallel Roger himself. Whether that be him trading himself in for Ace or being taken prisoner or something along those lines, I don't see Whitebeard making it out of this. But don't put away your tinfoil just yet, because we'll talk plenty more about this in just a little bit. And shortly after, we finally run into someone that I was more than happy to see right from the get-go. That being Bon Clay. After his noble sacrifice back in Alabasta, and of course his shenanigans with the crew in general, he quickly became one of my favorites to come out of the entire Baroque work stretch of the story. So seeing him here was absolutely awesome. And the complete 180 to Buggy of him just instantly agreeing to help Luffy gave me a solid chuckle as well. At this point in the arc, I had pretty much figured out that this was indeed a soft reset to allow characters we've defeated before to return sometime in the New World, which only made Bon Clay's sacrifice at the end that much worse, because I fully expected for him to stick around, though more on that when we get there. We then cut to the Navy, where we pretty much hear that things are going down very soon. We first hear that Shanks has had a fight with Kaido, who had supposedly been going after Whitebeard before Shanks intercepted him. Though this makes me wonder, why did Kaido go after Whitebeard? Does he have some interests with the Navy? I don't really see any other reason why he would have wanted to fight Whitebeard now, unless he expects Whitebeard to be defeated? Though I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But yeah, then we hear this Marine dude whose name I forgot basically just spell out exactly what I've been thinking. This war will be history. Oh, and the shot of Whitebeard here is absolutely brilliant. And in a broader sense, the way tension was built up throughout this entire arc with these sorts of little splice-ins where we see the final pieces being put into place, was really cool to see. And needless to say, I was at the edge of my seat. Though cutting back to Luffy, he finally runs into the big bad of Impel Down, Warden Magellan. And before we get to the fight itself, I want to mention a few broader things. First off, both in his fight against Magellan, as well as throughout the arc in general, the animation has been absolutely excellent. If you recall what I said in Thriller Bark about some of the scenes being quite inconsistent, here I really didn't notice any of that. It's been super crisp all the way through. Though secondly, I want to briefly talk about the Warden himself. In short, I think he was a very boring character. His fruit ability was somewhat interesting, mostly due to how dangerous it is even if you're not just fully beaten, though everything else about him was just super meh. And I'll be honest, the whole potty humor from him just made me groan by the end of the arc. How many times can you really play up him not being able to leave the toilets? It just seemed like an overly convenient way of removing him from the story, and it wasn't even funny, so I really wasn't a fan of that. Personality-wise, he's also pretty much a blank slate, though to be fair, that does make sense in the context of Impel Down. But as a bad guy in general, he certainly does not live up to the likes of Old Crocky, Arlong, or most other villains for that matter. As for the fight itself, I'll admit, despite me not really being a fan of the Warden, it was pretty great. Seeing Bon Clay's inner turmoil of whether to try and save Luffy, but realizing that he just can't, was really rough. And then seeing Luffy just being brought down time after time was, as I've said many times before, a solid reminder that brute force isn't always the answer. In a way, I almost got the Sabaody vibes, as we see Luffy seemingly finally getting a hit on him, only to collapse then and there. And with that said, Luffy is taken to level 5 and imprisoned himself, all the while the Warden's poison is slowly killing him. Though with Bon Clay being the best guy ever, he feels guilty about not being able to help Luffy and goes to save him with the hope of taking him to the mythical Eva, who supposedly lives somewhere in the prison. At this point, we once again see Buggy and Mr. 3 split off from Bon Clay, which is where I kind of got tired of seeing them. Like I said, it's not that their side of the story was bad, it's just that I wanted to see Luffy's and Bon Clay's that much more. And frankly, I think it was supposed to be more so the comedic side of this arc, but it really didn't land for me. So yeah, I don't know, I just really got tired of them. Though skipping ahead a little to Bon Clay actually saving Luffy, we see a very interesting scene. We see Bon Clay run into a bunch of wolves, only for Luffy to get up, even in his current state, and blast them with Haki. Which once again leads me on to the question of, how does it work? Based on what we saw in Amazon Lily and sort of what we saw here, for Luffy it seems to be like a defense mechanism, whereas when we saw Rayleigh use it, it was extremely precise. So how does one go about training it to become more precise? Obviously this is a rhetorical question, please don't answer it. But it's pretty clear that Luffy doesn't yet fully understand how to use it himself. I mean, he's not even conscious here. So is it just a case of properly learning about it and then using it over and over and over? Or is there some sort of hard limitation as to how much you can use it? Judging by what we've seen so far, the Conqueror's Haki is an absolute, since both in Sabaody some people remain conscious, and in Amazon Lily, Hancock was fine as well. So is it rather a case of overpowering someone's Haki? Yeah, my head is still spinning about this entire Haki thing, so I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Though this brings us to what may just be my favorite part of this arc. Level 5.5. There were so many interesting things here that I will almost certainly forget to mention something, but let's get into it. First and foremost, the existence of such a place was already a really unique concept. As we'd later hear, it basically just came down to someone with a fruit power that made it easy for them to empty out this space. And in the world of One Piece, that makes perfect sense. I would have honestly loved to see a flashback to see how this sort of underground community was first established, though for now at least, we sadly don't really get much of that. But we of course get to meet Ivankov. I absolutely love this character. Both their personality and Devil Fruit power are so unique, not to mention their backstory, which we'll get into in just a moment. Though taking a step back for a second, it's going to be interesting seeing Sanji come back into the picture, as he will have most likely heard about Eva too. As to how much he'll know about them, who knows, but last we saw him, he is on Eva's island. As for Floor 5.5 itself, it's also here where we're introduced to Eva's right hand, Inazuma, and oh boy, do I want to see more of him. His scissor fruit power is awesome, and his character design and general vibe are so cool. So, all in all, a great new character which I hope is used a little more in the following arcs, because we barely got to see them here. And that actually brings me on to a question. Assuming that the Straw Hats don't appear out of nowhere in Marineford, which they still may do, who will tag along on Luffy's way back to Sabaody? Might we just get a new crewmate out of this adventure? Unfortunately, I doubt it's going to be Eva or Inazuma since we already know they have different plans, but perhaps someone like Jinbei might tag along? As we'd see later in the arc, which of course we'll talk about, he does have a bit of a Straw Hat vibe, though with him too, I don't know if it makes sense for his story to join Luffy, since he'd pretty much say outright that the only reason he's helping is because he wants to save Ace and help Whitebeard specifically. Though yes, I am very curious to see if our lineup changes as a result of this entire pirate meetup in Marineford. Jumping back into the story, we hear that after Inazuma brought Luffy and Bon Clay in, Luffy, even while straight up dying himself, begged for Eva to help Bon Clay. And I know I said this a million times in Amazon Lily, but Luffy really is the best dude ever, isn't he? As for himself, we hear that his body was essentially beyond repair, and the only way how Eva might attempt to save him was by giving him a regenerative hormone and hoping that he himself can fight off the poison. Though, this honestly had me a bit puzzled as to how exactly the Warden's fruit power works. We've seen both with Eneru and back in Logtown that Luffy's body is completely immune to lightning because he's made of rubber. Though how exactly does that work with poison? Obviously he's still human, so if he were to consume a whole bunch of it, he'd be in trouble. But why is it the case that when he gets it on his skin, he is also affected? It's not like the poison was acid, so it shouldn't burn through his rubber skin, right? So, technically speaking, he should have been less affected? Obviously, there are plenty of poisons in the real world that are absorbed through a person's skin. But again, Luffy is made of rubber. But alright, fine, that's semantics. What's more important is that Bon Clay wants to see him, but when they arrive, all they hear is Luffy screaming in agony. And we then learn that he's been screaming like that for the past 10 hours and will continue to do so for 2 days. And now that is a big ol' yikes. Like I said in Thriller Bark, this is almost like Zoro's Nothing Happened moment. We don't really grasp how much suffering they're going through, since it's not something simple like a sword or just blunt damage. All we hear are screams of absolute agony, and I think that makes it so much more impactful. Though what makes this thing so much worse is the recovery period. Luffy does not have 2 days, and on top of that, this treatment takes away 10 years of Luffy's life. But I'll be honest, the entire 10 years thing did seem a little throwaway. Obviously that is a very big loss, though that doesn't really affect the story we're seeing in any way, does it? Unless the series keeps on going for what, 30 more years? This deduction from his life doesn't really mean anything. So I do think that, in a way, it was just written in to escalate the stakes without actually or visibly escalating them. Though, with that said, get a tiny sliver of tinfoil because I have some light theories here. Remember how Roger essentially died from an illness after achieving everything he could have imagined? And remember my heavy tinfoil reincarnation theory? Well, what if Luffy is being set up to have exactly the same fate? Because yes, while him taking off 10 years of his life doesn't mean anything now, it definitely will in the long run, not to mention the constant hell he's putting his body through. So, what if the story of One Piece ends with Luffy finding the One Piece, and his crew learning all the true secrets of the poneglyphs, learning of the entirety of the true history and everything that entails, etc, etc. Then, just like Roger, because Luffy cares for his crew so much, he sacrifices himself and makes a deal with the Navy to capture him with the explicit note that his crew is immune from now on. Since Luffy's lifespan is already so much shorter than his crew's, this would mean that they get to live out their lives with their dreams achieved. Zoro would have become the greatest swordsman, Nami will have explored the entire world and drawn maps of it, Robin will have learned the true history and fulfilled the wishes of Ohara, etc, etc. I mean, picture this. The adventure is finally over, the crew drops off Luffy in Logtown a la Roger, while Brook finally goes to meet back up with Laboon on the other side of the Reverse Mountain. And if you think from the narrative standpoint, Luffy being the only person from his crew to ever die would cement him as the greatest captain to ever live, as not one of his crewmates would have ever lost their lives, making the Straw Hats the most infamous crew in history. Name them the Immortal Crew or something like that, and job's done. And while yes, that does somewhat go against Luffy's wishes to be the most free, I do think that him realizing his fate anyway and instead giving up his life for his crew would be a very fitting end. Especially if he pulls a Roger and has Robin retell the true history or something like that to the entire world, thereby setting everyone free because they finally know the true history. Though, even with that said, if Luffy were to be a reincarnated Roger like I talked about in Sabaody, I feel like him meeting the same fate would be tragic in the sense that it's just history repeating itself. While I think much of Luffy's story has been the complete opposite, it's been about breaking the cycle. But at the same time, like I also said in Sabaody, Luffy's crew has certain knowledge that Roger's never had, so in some ways, he has already surpassed Roger. But alright, enough about that, I have no idea what I'm talking about. It's also here where my mind was fully made up, as we get this scene of Luffy and Ace as kids. And I'll just read out my notes to you. Oh my god, flashback to Luffy and Ace. He's so dead, isn't he? Though keep this in mind for a moment, let's tackle what happens here first. After Bon Clay hears about Luffy's suffering, and because he feels guilty about leaving him before, he heads into the cave where Luffy is held and begins to call to him, telling him to get better. See, this is why I said Bon Clay was the best. But we also see that this wasn't just a nice gesture. He keeps going for hours upon hours upon hours, just cheering for him, trying to repay Luffy's kindness. And after everyone else is inspired by Bon Clay, we see them join in with his cheering until unexpectedly, Luffy gets back up. And the first thing he screams is, of course, food. Yes, 100% yes. And as if all of that wasn't enough, once again we see Luffy just asking whether Bon Clay is alright, and then bows for him. Zoro should really start sweating, because if he doesn't pop back up in the story soon, Luffy might just take his position as my #1 member of the crew. Just saying. Though it's here where very, very big things are discussed. In short, Luffy asks Eva if they can get him out. Though Eva responds by saying that it's not quite their time to escape just yet, and that Dragon's plan is not quite ready. Only for Luffy to casually say that that's his dad's. And oh boy, I told you not to put away your tinfoil because it is time for many theories. In short, after learning that Dragon is Luffy's father and Ace is his brother, Eva pretty much says that there's no way he can let Dragon's son die. And then drops the line, they don't want to fight Whitebeard and Dragon at the same time. This was very much a light bulb moment for me, because yes, I think it is time for Dragon to make an appearance. We already know that Eva has been waiting for him, and we know that Dragon has kept tabs on what's going on in the world. And in post-Enies lobby, he very directly said that they'll meet back up again soon. Which leads me onto my big theory. What's a better way of delivering a revolutionist message than appearing at what will definitely go down as a war that changed the world? As of right now, and yes, I know this is sort of redundant since we're basically almost there, but let me have fun, this is how I think Marineford will go down. Whitebeard arrives and the assault begins. Midway through the battle, Ace is executed just as it was planned. And the entire thing is turned up about 10 notches as Whitebeard unleashes his full might on the island, with the only intention being to wipe out everything. Like, what if he does have a zone type dragon fruit? Imagine him swooping in and just literally burning everything.